Welcome back to The Critical Gentleman. Today we're going to discuss the best kept secret of Baselworld 2018, the Longines Nautilus. I mentioned this watch in my 5 best watches from Baselworld 2018 video, but I didn't go into too much depth because at that point there hadn't been a lot of information released about this watch. Interestingly, there still has not been a great wealth of information regarding this timepiece to come out of Baselworld. There is virtually no video to be found and none of the major blogs have mentioned it. I was able to find a few photos on a foreign language blog, and only this week was I able to find one on any English blogs. Likewise, most of the photos I found have come from forums as opposed to media outlets, leaving me to wonder how come this watch has had no publicity, given that, in my opinion, it's one of the most exciting announcements this year. I don't have the answer to that question, but I suspect it may be related to the way Longines has treated its heritage collection. I read that in order to see the new Longines military watch would require a special request. They didn't have it out in their main booth at Baselworld. I'm curious if the same is true for the Nautilus. Unless you had prior information that it existed, maybe you didn't even know it was there. As a matter of fact, the only information about the specifications of this watch came out on Instagram first. Rumor has it that this will be a 42mm case with 22mm lug width. Pricing is suspected to start about $2,600 MSRP, which means you'll likely be able to find it a little bit less on some retailers. Another interesting element to this watch is the texture on the dial. You can tell from some of the close-up shots that the dial is not just a matte finish dial, but has a certain amount of texturing to it. It looks like it's almost intentionally styled to be one of those crazed, tropical dials you see on some of the vintage pieces coming to market today. Last year we saw a move towards that vintage patina look. Omega has started to use it on some of their reissues, and other brands are now adopting the same thing. It has that yellowish patina look, which we see on vintage pieces and are now being put on modern replications as well. Not only does the Nautilus Diver use that patina lume look, but we've got now a crazing texture on the dial. We've got that matte finish, and it almost seems to be, and I hate to use this word, but a replica rather than a reissue. The reason I say that is because not only do we have a reproduction of the original watch, but we have it in the condition that you would find a vintage piece would it come to market today. This is not what the Skin Diver would have looked like when you first purchased it in the 60s. It is an analog to what they look like now, coming to vintage market, having weathered 60 years of history. I respect Longines' desire to cater to what the market wants right now, which is authentic vintage pieces. Considering the Skin Diver is exceedingly rare and quite expensive, this is a great way to add one to your collection without having to put down the cash for a vintage piece. Longines has done the same thing with their new military watch, right down to the artificial speckling on the dial. Now again, this is not something that would have been found on the watch when it was created originally in the 40s. It is something you find on the vintage pieces now due to aging. They've decided that part of the desire of a vintage watch is the patina, and they have created it artificially. The word for this in the furniture and the clothing industry is distressed. So is there a movement towards distressing new watches so that they appear to be vintage pieces? I have a feeling it's going to be somewhat of a controversial question, as there are collectors who really like the look and will appreciate the opportunity to get a piece that they would otherwise not be able to afford. I also don't think collectors have anything to worry about, as a reissue or an homage or even a replica, whatever you want to call it, is never going to affect the value of an authentic vintage timepiece. Authenticity, collectability, history will never be replaced by a modern reproduction. Still, I could see the potential for frustration in distressing a watch artificially, almost forcing it to become something it's not. As with most things, I think there is a happy medium between honoring the past tradition and trying to replicate it. That said, the Longines Legend Diver, the Nautilus Skin Diver, and the military watch, all released this year at Baselworld, are probably 3 of my favorite releases. Whether you feel that the vintage distressing of these watches is kitschy or attractive, I think all 3 of these watches have something to offer, and most importantly represent an awareness on behalf of Longines regarding what the collectors want, as well as innovation in terms of what the future of vintage reeditions might look like. As always, please subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching The Critical Gentleman. Stay tuned for even more Baselworld coverage coming up.